1849, the California Gold Rush. 1849, the California Gold Rush. Focus question. What was the effect of the gold rush on westward expedition? Keeping a secret. On the morning of January 24th, 1848, James Marshall went to inspect the ditch that carried water from the American River through the new sawmill his crew was building in California. The crew has deepened the section of the ditch that ran out of the mill to make the water flow more quickly. At the end of the ditch, about 6 inches under the water, she spotted something shiny. Marshall collected several pieces that showed his crew. They tested the pieces. It was good. Marshall showed the good to the owner of the mill, John Shutter, who scrolled 48,000 acres to land in California he called New Switzerland after his home country. Shutter bought the land from the Mexican government, but it actually belonged to the indigenous Nisnan people. Sutter had taken more than land. Sutter's deal with the Mexican government required that he not harm any of the Nisnan people in the area. Nevertheless, he trained many native people to become part of his own private army and kidnapped and enslaved other native people to work the land. Sutter tried to get everyone to keep the secret that gold had been discovered. He wanted to keep the riches for himself. 6 days after Marshall found the gold, Mexico signed the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War. The treaty gave California to the United States. Neither side knew that gold had just been discovered there. Sam Brannan, who ran a store near Shutter's mill, soon let out the secret. Brannan wanted to cash in when he heard the news, but he wasn't interested in mining. Instead, he bought all the shovels in the nearby city of San Francisco. Then he filled a bottle with gold dust and ran through the streets yelling about the great discovery. The city of 850 people almost emptied after Brannan sold them each the tools they needed to find gold, picks, axes, fence, and shovels at very expensive prices. Panning. Unlike gold in most places, California's gold wasn't locked deep under the ground. Erosion had long ago washed the metal down the mountains and into rivers. Miners used a technique called placer mining that allowed them to sift gold out of the riverbed using a shallow, flat pan. Placer mining works because gold is much heavier than gravel. Prospectors stood in rivers and shoveled gravel into their pan. They removed large rocks, then carefully swirled the pan. The dirt and gravel spilled over the edges with the water. The shiny flakes of gold stayed at the bottom of the pan. Word-wise, the term prospector means a person who moves to a spot with the prospect or possibility of finding gold and becoming rich. The 49ers. Rumors soon swirled in the eastern states about gold out west. A California official sent a report about the gold to Washington, D.C., along with a sample. In December 1848, the president told Congress about the discovery. It was true. Gold fever, the greed and contagious excitement brought on by the discovery of gold, took hold of many people. At the time, many workers earned less than $1 a day. For them, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. In 1849, around 90,000 people, called 49ers, joined the gold rush. Around 10%, or 9,000, were women. The 49ers came from across the United States as well as from Mexico, Central and South America, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. Black people were among the 49ers as well. Around 200 to 300 were enslaved and had been forced by their enslavers to go to California. Free black people also traveled west in hopes of finding gold. By 1852, around 2,000 black people lived in California, which was about 1% of the population. The trip to the gold mines could take months and was not cheap. People had to pay for transportation and supplies to last until they arrived in California. Many 49ers left behind jobs and families. They planned to make a fortune quickly and return home. Others were ready for whatever adventure they found. People from California, Oregon, and Mexico were the first to show up at the rivers near Shutter's Mill. Locals only had to travel short distances with their pack animals. It took longer for immigrants to arrive by boat from faraway countries and for people to cross the United States. At that time, it was easier to get to California from China than from the East Coast. By ship. About half of the 49ers decided to travel by ship to avoid crossing the lands of native peoples. It took ships between 5 and 8 months to sail from the East Coast, around the tip of South America and back up to California. The cheapest ticket was $45, about $2,300 in today's money. Lodging was a tiny bunk in the bottom of the ship. Passengers ate dried meat and had biscuits filled with weevils and drank water. They suffered as a result of shipwrecks, seasickness, and disease. Many reported that the worst thing were crowding and boredom. Some passengers decided to save time by taking a shortcut through Panama. They could canoe and hike across 60 miles, 97 kilometers of jungle, then catch another ship. These 49ers faced an extreme environment with hazards they were unfamiliar with, including bad weather and wild animals. Many fell ill. If they made it across, there were still a risk that they would have to wait weeks or months to catch a ship on the other side. By wagon. It took about the same amount of time to get to California by wagon. Much of the land between 49ers on the East Coast and California still belonged to native peoples. Settlers moving out west often hunted without permission, stole from native peoples, and attacked them. Native peoples thus viewed them with hostility. Most people left from St. Louis, Missouri, and westernmost U.S. city at the time. Wiggins followed the California Trail from 2,100 miles, 3,380 kilometers across the flat prairie. A wagon could travel about 15 miles, 24 kilometers in a day. If it didn't break down, there wasn't much rain, and the oxen stayed healthy. The 49ers had to get the wagons across rivers, up mountains, down cliffs, and across deserts. They were pounded by rain, wind, and snow. In addition to bad weather, another danger facing 49ers came from disease, starvation, and accidents. For those who made it to California, life did not get easier. Prospectors lived in mining camps made of tents and rough shelters, and worked 12 hours a day. Many fell ill, often due to poor conditions and diet. Despite these challenges, it was difficult to give up. The next pen of gravel might be worth a fortune. Equal opportunity? For native peoples, the gold rush was disastrous. It opened a gateway to the west. Throngs of adventurers and shelters poured into native lands. Many different groups of native people lived in California. As 49ers moved out west, violent attacks forced native peoples off much of their land. Thousands were killed, and thousands more died of disease. Once California became a state in 1850, the U.S. government took control of the land, including areas with gold. Soon, fear and hatred led to the killing of thousands of native peoples. New laws allowed shelters to arrest native people for minor wrongdoings. The government then forced them to pay their fines by working on ranches. Around 300,000 native peoples lived in California before the gold rush. More than 100,000 were dead only 20 years later. Good prospects, bad endings. Several of the men involved in the original discovery of gold ended up with nothing to show for it. John Shutter lost his golden property when the United States would not recognize his grant from Mexico. Shutter, along with Sam Brennan and James Marshall, eventually lost their fortunes. As the hills filled with prospectors, white miners began to oppose other groups hunting for gold, especially Chinese miners. White prospectors sometimes violently forced miners from outside the United States to leave the mines. Almost 3,000 Chinese people came to California in 1851. A terrible crop season in China made that number rise to more than 20,000 the next year. California texted miners from outside the United States to prospect. Some U.S. miners wanted to make it so difficult for them to mine that they would leave. 1 in every 5 miners who came to California in 1849 died within 6 months. Even those who found gold often lost it to robbers, gambling, or paying high prices for everyday goods. Some early protesters were successful. Most of the riches from gold went to large companies. They were able to mine with high-pressure jets of water or dig deep mines. Entrepreneurs made a fortune by selling to the miners. Sam Brannan became one of the first millionaires in the United States. Levi Strauss sold pants taut enough to handle the work, blue jeans. Women especially had many more opportunities in the West. They started business, cooking, running boarding houses, and washing clothes for the prospectors. Mary Ellen Pleasant. Mary Ellen Pleasant was a black American businesswoman who worked as part of the Underground Railroad. Women weren't expected as important prospectors during the gold rush. Some people say that Pleasant worked as a good and a housekeeper just to get close to wealthy people to secretly hear that they were talking about. Pleasant became a millionaire buying and selling buildings and businesses during the gold rush. The Golden State. The biggest winners of the gold rush were white settlers, the U.S. government, and wealthy investors. The gold rush was devastating to native peoples. However, around 300,000 settlers, mostly white, swarmed California. In the 1860s, the country began to connect the East and West by building the Transcontinental Railway, causing further destruction to native lands. The gold rush changed the western United States forever. Today, California has more people than any other state. It was a huge economy, larger than that of most countries. Nearly 2 centuries after the gold rush, California still lives up to its nickname, the Golden State.